Hello, watercolor students. I want to go over the measurements of the other half of the first wheel measurement that you did. Once the wheel is done and the designs for the glazing project are done, and everybody has their carbon paper and tracing and watercolor paper, you will have transferred the wheel with the yellow carbon onto the left, as well as the design on the other project. On this project, on the right side, we're not using the yellow carbon because it's scales and basic shapes that are practice. The only thing is you want to try not to press too hard with a pencil. There's nothing worse in watercolor than seeing a pencil line. If you want to do this on top of the yellow, that is actually better because then you can measure the whole thing out on the yellow and then just it'll have it on there. So in other words, you can take a piece of your carbon and line it up and tape it down and then have everything that you need without using pencil. In fact, I'm going to do that because I would rather have yellow marks on my warm-up than pencil marks, and it's also a good way to get used to this process. But you have to line this up exactly to the paper, and we're not using tracing paper here at all. We're just going to do some measurements and draw some shapes on this side. If you feel more comfortable doing this in pencil, I'd say this is the one case, the one exception where that's okay as long as you do it really light. But this is another alternative. We have the carbon, let's take advantage of it. So I'm just securing it as always. And I have this half of the paper. The wheel is over here, and I mentioned that the wheel sort of runs in to this side. This side of the paper, you can see from my line under there, was here because the paper's 15 by 20, which means this side is 10. And you can double check up here, 10 and 10, so it's lines in the middle. This side is also 10, and then this to this is 15. We're not going to deal with this up here right now, and for a minute, we're going to do with the bottom. And it's very simple, but it can seem really complicated because we're going to be using 1/2 inch quite a bit. It's not that tricky, but the first thing we want to do before you even start to make this easier is to mark out an 8-inch height on here. So we're dividing this 15-inch into 8 and 7 by doing that. But all you have to do is do your 8-inch. And of course with the T-square, you don't have to do it twice like I do because I don't have one that's small enough. And then we're just connecting this. And the great thing is you're doing carbon, so you can press as hard as you want on here. In fact, you can even use a pen. You don't want to press so hard that it makes a dent or is so yellow or thick, but you can get this pretty good. So basically from the center line, we're going up 8 and we're going over the remainder of the half of the sheet, which is 10. So from there, we're going to do our measurements for the scale. I wanted to make sure that you had enough of a length and width of a scale to get the good practice, because this is going to be a very, very challenging project. I know it's at the beginning, but part of this is to see your evolution by the end of the class. You're going to have to use a lot of control, and you're also going to get to know your brushes and get to know how much water they hold and how to pull a puddle into nothing and how to pull 2 puddles into each other without any puddles, any backgrounds, any streaks, and it's really a matter of control. It's called wet and wet controlled blending. It would be like if you were doing a sky in a landscape or something. You want it to flow one into the other like a gentle value scale. And I'm going to demo on a larger scale as well, but our scales are going to be smaller, and depending on the size of your scale, the brush you choose, it has to always be a flat brush. We almost never use round brushes in watercolor, it's rare. So you want to have a brush that's wide enough to pull one into the other. And I will demo this many times. Some videos may be helpful, some videos may be boring or repetitive, but I'm hoping that there'll be moments where you really are able to see what the goal is of this. So in this area here, we're just going to measure it out. So once you get this, we're going to make a 1/2 inch border all the way around. This is just to make it easier to do the rest. So go up 1/2 inch, 1/2 inch, I have to do 2, and then this direction 1/2 inch and 1/2 inch. We don't do a lot of measuring out in the class, but when we do, it's really important to get it accurate. It's just craftsmanship, as in any art class. Especially with watercolor, you never want fingerprints, you never want it dirty, you never want the paint to be mushy. All of that stuff is presentation. You never want things torn or, you know, presented in that way. This is different. This is just the materials, but it's not how you present it in a portfolio. Okay, so I'm going to measure these two, and I'm going to go down to this corner, and then up here I'm going to measure 1/2 inch and go up to this corner, and I'm going to go ahead and draw that 1/2 inch. If you're using a pencil, that looks a little crooked. See, that's why the yellow is good, because when you mess up, it's easy to change it, fix it. Much better. So keep an eraser handy. Try to use a 2H or a 4H if you ever have to in watercolor. From your drawing class, you might have a leftover 2H or 4H. It's very hard and light pencil, but if not, just delicate, sharp 2-inch or 2H. I mean 2, like a regular number 2 pencil, which is HB. Here's one here. This one went off my edge of the thing, but here. So you've got, basically you've got 8 by 10 and then a 1/2 inch border around. A lot of the videos I do are to try to show, but obviously I'm not spending 7 hours a week like you are in an art class, so I try to get it as best I can in a short blip. Alright, so 1.5 inches from the bottom, we're going to go up 1.5 inches. Each scale is 1.5 inches, and in between each scale will be a 1/2 inch border. So this is where it gets a little weird. So you can write it on here. This is 1.5 inches. Once you hit up 1.5 inches, go up another 1/2 inch. This is so that you have a little gap in between. This is a little 1/2 inch, a gap between your next scale. So 1.5 inches is here, and then 1/2 inch is there. So I can connect these. And if you can't see this when I take it off, I'll go over it in pencil just so you can get a sense of the warm-up. Like all of our projects, I anticipate you doing this at least twice, this whole paper. Sometimes the wheel comes out good, but this whole side is not good. You can also cut a sheet of paper in half, or you can use another sheet and just use half of it. Sometimes this comes out great and the wheel's awful. You don't want to turn in a wheel that goes up, down in saturation. Same with this. You don't want a messy area. I mean, we're going to resolve the hues on your palette before you even get to this, but that will be fine. But this part can come off really wrong. So 1.5, half, and then 1.5, half, and then we can get rid of this part. I realize we don't need that, but it's still helpful to do the 1/2 inch border first. So just let this go off. I shouldn't have done that. Alright, so 1.5, half, 1.5, half, 1.5, half, and then we're going to fit one more in here. So before you do that top one, erase the top of your 1/2 inch border. I still think that might have made it easier, only because it can be confusing with this 1/2 inch business around. And I'll make that darker when I get there so you can see. But that was one extra line we didn't need to make. Main thing is we want to get 4 scales as evenly as we can, and it's good practice with the measurements and the T-squares. 1/2 inch in between. You can also do this on tracing paper. It makes it a lot easier to redo because you can just put the corners in. Like if you had your tracing paper on here and you just did all your corners, it'd be a lot easier to redo if this comes out weird. But I'm gonna go ahead and make it darker just so you can see what we're doing. 1/2 inch on the bottom, 1/2 inch on the sides, 1/2 inch in between. Not worrying about the top, because that's gonna flow into something else. So here we have our 4 scales. Each one is 1.5 inch tall, and it has a 1/2 inch in between as a gap. And remember, you always are going to use a side of scratch paper. It has to be watercolor paper. Like this, when you cut something, you have an extra piece, but you can never use the back, ever. You have to make sure it's the front and matches the texture of the front of the paper. And I mentioned in there too, if you mark the top like this before you ever take it off the pad, you'll never have that problem. If you cut it into pieces, be sure to mark all the pieces. Sometimes it's just hard to see which side is the one that holds water. It's a little easier to see outside, but okay, you can see what I did here. So I got rid of this line. I didn't need it. Basically all you need is a 1/4 inch around here. You don't need it up here. That's why this kind of was helpful to get it, but it's fine. So this is what you have. This is one scale. This is the next scale. This is the next scale. And this is the next scale. So you're going to end up with 4 scales, 1/2 inch in between, 1.5 tall each, and 1/2 inch around and on the bottom. On the top, you're going to create shapes. You're going to create medium-sized shapes, not tiny, not too big because we don't have much area for it. And they can be, these are going to be dry anyway, and so you can do as close to them as you need to. The goal is to have a variety of geometric and organic shapes. Just don't go past here. You can go up to the edge. You want to have at least 2 that go off the edge, because we're going to be doing the even wash technique. Some little tendrils are good too, because it'll force you to use your round brushes and your baby flat brushes. Some long ones could be good. So you want to get at least 4, maybe 5. Try to get a simple one that's smaller. Something geometric is good. These are going to be flat, even washes, so they don't need to look like anything or be anything. The only thing is some geometric, some organic, various sizes, and off the edges on at least 2, because that's going to show you an easier technique for moving the puddle. So that's the right side of the board. Kind of went off on that, but I think that it will be a good way to make sure everything's there. And once that's done, it can be all in yellow like I did it, or it can be very lightly in pencil. This is one of those few that we can have pencil on the actual watercolor paper instead of just on the tracing. There we go. It showed up nicely. And you can see that I could erase. So I have my 4 scales. I have my, this is an old measurement that I did that I don't need now. But you can see pencil's harder to erase than the yellow. See how I made that extra line? Check that out. Really good. And if you use a clean eraser, that really helps with the craftsmanship. But now you can see. I'm going to lift it up in case you can't. I think you can. But basically this is project number 1. and it's all set up and ready to go. So we have now the wheel all measured out. We have the even wash shapes, and we have the scales, either lightly in pencil or with yellow. And then I'm gonna lighten here where I pressed really hard because it's just too dark for me. The goal is that the watercolorist is the only one who should be able to see this stuff, not the viewer. You don't want that visible at the end. So, but in our case, that's what we got.